I've got a friend who everyone knows is the funny guy. I mean, he actually is a literal stand-up comedian professionally, but he's also the guy who just sort of makes everyone laugh no matter where we are or what group we're in. But if you watch my friend closely, you'll notice I don't know, he doesn't actually seem to be motivated by just getting the most laughs. He's not making cheap jokes, he's not making fun of people. Anytime I watch him, I notice that he's actually motivated by giving people a sense of being included. He turns like ordinary moments into games so that everyone can play. He fills spaces with laughter so that nobody feels singled out. He warms up whatever room he finds himself in so nobody ever feels left out in the cold. My funny guy friend is not the guest on our podcast today, but Sarah Westfall, who is our guest, she has me thinking about my friend's way of being. In Sarah's words, I think my friend might be a person of welcome. Do you know people like that in your life? People who embody belonging, people who are so selfless, but not out of scarcity. Instead, out of the abundance of love that fuels their life. If you do know people like that, you should reach out to them. I mean, for real, like you should send them a text or an email or call them or something. You should let them know how beautiful and cherished they really are. Today's guest, Sarah, has a truly transformational message that has me thinking about the idea of belonging in a brand new way. Sarah Westfall has a brand new book out called The Way of Belonging, Reimagining Who We Are and How We Relate. And you're going to love the gentle and meaningful conversation we have on this episode. Sarah's writing has been featured in such publications as Relevant, Fathom Mag, and Encourage. Her previous work professionally includes serving as director of community for online writing groups and as a student development professional on college campuses. She knows belonging. She has lived in belonging. She has a really fantastic podcast you got to listen to, and I just feel really honored to get to host Sarah on our show. Hey, I feel really honored to have you here too. It's such a gift to me that you're listening in. I hope you know you're welcome here. I hope you know you are seen and believed and celebrated here. I am so glad you're listening. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Between Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Mattson, and I'm joined today by author and community builder Sarah Westfall. Sarah's writing her podcast, which, by the way, is called Human Together. You should just go look that up right now. Human Together. It's a great name for a podcast. I love the branding around it. I love everything about this podcast. I mean, all of her work, everything that Sarah's doing is so deeply aligned with what we're doing here at Between. And I was just so thrilled when she said yes to joining us on the show. Sarah, you've got a book that when this episode airs, I think like mid-June-ish, this new book is going to be out in the world. It's a big deal. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's strange to put so much work into something and then it's kind of like a kid. You like eventually it needs to go make its own way in the world. And so now we're at that stage where the way of belonging is making its own way and we'll see where it goes and what it does.
Yeah, we'll talk about your book here in a little bit, but the way of belonging, I mean, again, for our listeners, anybody who pays any attention to what we're doing in between, I mean, everything we're doing is about sacred human connection. And so a book titled The Way of Belonging is grabs my attention at a bookstore right away and grabs my attention as I was watching you start to promote this upcoming book. And I'm just so excited to get into this longing we all have for belonging, this struggle to find it sometimes, and maybe even some of our misconceptions about what it really is and what we have to do to get there. So I'm pumped to get into this, Sarah.
Yeah, great. I'm really glad that you opened the door for this conversation. I'm excited to dive in.
So I like to start our show with offering space for storytelling. I like to call this sacred story time. I don't think anybody else calls it that, but I'm trying to make it a thing. I guess make it a
Brand
segment.
it.
Yeah, that's right. Brand it. Yeah. So trademark sacred story time. Uh, I'm I'd love to maybe offer you some space to to share a story of sacred human connection, which is, what this show is all about. Maybe a story that reveals a little bit about who you are, and maybe even a little bit about what you believe. Um, I mean, I'm guessing this new book is sort of rooted in and probably filled with stories of sacred moments of human connection. You got any stories like that you could share?
Yeah, a lot of the stories that I share in the book are kind of some of those more pillar or pivotal moments in my own journey. But I think that so many of so much of the sacredness of human connection happens within the small moments of
Mm,
just our everyday lives. And just yesterday, I'm in Indiana, and we had some early spring storms roll through, and it woke us all up early. We were all kind of, grumpy, and then somehow we also ended up being late for school. We have 4 boys, and so I was trying to, like, find the shoes and find the
mm,
backpacks and throwing butterscotch puddings into lunch boxes. And so it became kind of a mad scramble at the end to get everyone out the door, despite rising early. And I was trying to call out to one of our boys, and he wasn't answering. And, like, to a point where it was like, it is so silent. Did he already get in the car? Like, what is going on? So I went up to his room, and the door was shut. So I knocked on the door, and I went inside, and I find him. Now he's like early elementary school, and I see him sitting on the end of his bed, a book in his lap, and he looks up at me just teary eyed.
mm,
And I'm like immediately like, oh, what's going on here? And I sit down beside him, and he points to this boy and this graphic novel he was reading. And he said, Mom, it makes me so sad that he was left out.
mm,
It makes me so sad that they weren't inviting him to be involved. It just makes me so sad. And so, in the back of my mind, I'm like, we are late. He doesn't have shoes on, like all of these things
yeah,
that, as a parent, I'm trying to process. But then, just recognizing that he is having this intense reaction to what it feels like to be on the outside of
yeah,
something, um, a moment of empathy and compassion. And so I sat down beside him and just held him, and just acknowledged, like, that is a really hard emotion.
yeah.
Nobody likes to be left out and left behind. And he just kind of held me for a second, and then he took a deep breath and was like, okay, and then we went and found the shoes and did the thing. Um, but just that moment in and of itself of, I didn't think about it a lot as it was happening, but being able to pause in the midst of the hurried, like, tasky things we had to do throughout the course of our day, um and just being able to sit with one another in that hard thing of 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 acknowledging both the hard feelings he was grappling with, and allowing us to just sit in it together.
Mm,
um yeah, it was a special moment that then kind of set the course for the rest of my day in terms of paying attention to those smaller things that were happening and allowing myself to be interrupted
mm,
by those things, and seeing the sacredness of them. And so that, I want to live my whole life that way.
mm,
I don't think I do all
mhm,
the
mhm,
time,
mhm.
but I think that there's just so much sacredness if we're cultivating that attention to the
Yeah,
things and the people that are right in front of us.
yeah. There is so much we could unpack about that story, right? I mean, there is
Mhm.
the choice to give attention to that real moment for your son, as opposed to giving attention to how late you are and how nobody has their shoes on and oh my gosh, like get out the door. Like that might be one of the biggest tension points in my life. That getting my kids out the door
It's a
And
whole thing.
it is, but it's also like this, it is such a great metaphor for so much of our life that we could put our attention where it belonged in that moment, Sarah. And you made that choice to do so. And I love that you said, I don't always do that. And that's that. But you made that choice to do so. And it changed the way you saw the rest of the day, right? Like it changes the color of the lenses you're looking at the world through because of that one little choice. And those choices are so hard. And I don't feel I really try not to feel shame, and I certainly never want to make other people feel shame about the jumping into the hurried moments. But man, there is such beauty and power when we make that choice. There's another layer of that story that's just about mother-son connection that is beautiful. Then there's the whole third layer about the content of the story and about how Sarah, I sometimes I sometimes feel like I've I'm smart. I've grown up. I'm an adult. I got a master's degree. Look at me. I have a look at all the impressive things. And then I remember how much of a elementary school aged boy I still am and how much if I look at myself or if I look at the social dynamics of the grown adults around me, it's the same thing as a kid being left out in on a playground or a kid in a graphic novel not feeling belonging, feeling cut out from a group. There is no difference. It's not like, well, that's childish, that's silly. No, there is no difference. We live The only difference is that kids see it, name it, and try to deal with it and talk about it. And we don't, right? I don't know. That stuff, there was so much in that story, Sarah.
Yeah. It's funny that you say it reminds you so much of like your elementary school self that still lives within us
Yeah.
because like I had this moment like while it was happening that I had this like flashback to when I was younger and watched the movie Harriet the Spy. And for
Hmm.
whatever, and I cried
Yeah.
through that movie
Yeah.
because she was so misunderstood
Hmm.
and people were unkind to her. And I remembered having that experience in the middle of my son having his own moment with this
Hmm.
book. And so it is so true that those stories still live within us. Those
Yeah.
remembrances still live within us.
This is silly, but it's a fun. Yeah, maybe our listeners can think about the show from their childhood, the movie from their childhood, or the cartoon episode from their childhood that is still such a visceral memory. And for me, I'm embarrassed to say this. I
I
think it
can't wait.
was, I think it was, you remember the Garfield cartoon? You know, the Garfield.
Yeah.
So I think it was like the Garfield Christmas special. I mean, this is the 80s. I'm that old. And uh the Garfield Christmas special. And I think Odie, the dog, Garfield's, friend dog, is lost. And that's all. That's all I remember is that Odie is lost. The dog is lost. And I mean, I remember like wailing in my living room. Like I don't, that's I'm gonna bring this up with a therapist sometime soon. But like that, there's something about that. But there's also something about these simple stories, simple children's stories that get to the heart of our deep desire for longing, for not being lost, for staying a part of a group, for all these sort of innate human things. And I would offer spiritually based things, things that are longings of the soul that are, I mean, right there in cartoons from when we're kids. But I'll bet there are more people than just you and I who have some movie from our childhood or a thing from our childhood that we could remember that gets to that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, I know there's an anecdote in the book. Obviously, I haven't read the book, but in some of the information I got from your publicist and some of the stuff that I've gotten to see about the book, there's an anecdote in that book early on, I sense is how you've set it up about, I'll let you tell it, but there's a story about you encounter a woman at a church conference who I think she says, I'm doing all the things that everybody's telling me to do, and I'm still not finding belonging. I don't want to chop that story up, so I'll let you share that if you don't mind, because it
Yeah.
feels to me like such an important part of the message you're trying to share, but also an important part of your journey, your maybe faith journey, but also your journey around understanding this big question of belonging that all of us wrestle with.
Yeah. You did a good job of summarizing that story. So good job. Um, you know, a few years ago, I think it was just coming out of COVID, maybe it was around that time that seems to be in some
Yeah.
weird bubble, it was around there that I was part of a women's conference that was focusing in on community building and connection. And I think a lot of us coming out of pandemic life were definitely craving that and wanting it to look different, perhaps. And so I was part of this women's conference, not just speaking at it, but also helping coordinate it. So I had my hands really in the thing. And at the very end of the conference, some of us were on a panel in which the women who were there were able to submit questions anonymously. And one of the questions that was submitted was, I'm doing all the things. I'm inviting people over to my house. I'm scheduling coffee dates. Why does it still feel like I don't belong?
Mm,
And I don't remember exactly what was said from the stage, but the woman who asked that question quietly came up to me after the fact and asked it again. Um, and so there I was, having just spoken on community
mm,
and connection. And as I really paused and talked with her, I realized I didn't have a good answer for her question. That what does it look like to belong? What is belonging if we can't manufacture it? If we can't ask other people, I guess we can ask other people to give it to us, but we can't necessarily force them to
mm.
or manufacture that in some way. And so I don't remember exactly the words that we exchanged in that moment, but I walked away feeling incredibly discontent and wanting a better answer to that question. And so that really set me on a journey personally to find a better answer for her, but honestly for myself as well, because I think that if I was being really honest with myself, um, the things that we often do to create community or pursue connection, like those in and of themselves aren't necessarily um, it's not like formulaic,
Yeah.
you know? And so, yeah, that set me on a journey that has led me to eventually became a book, but it really came out of that moment and that question of needing to have a better answer.
Yeah. So is the conclusion that you came to that there just simply is no formula for belonging? It's just something we luck into, that we bounce into. I'm guessing that's not what the book ends up saying, but I mean, I'm left wondering what here's what I'll say, maybe to offer context from just my perspective, in a conversation just with you. For years, when I worked with college students, I had a colleague. Uh, Her name is Dr. Colleen Coffee Melchiori, and she's just one of my favorite people in the world. And someday I should have her on the podcast. Well, I haven't invited her yet, but anyway, she's just fantastic. And I was like I loved to talk about action, uh, doing things. I loved to talk about 7 step, formulas. I loved to talk about, purpose and action. And she loved to talk about belonging. And I would roll my eyes at her, Sarah. Like I would be like, well, whatever. But as I've processed that throughout, as I've gotten older, number one, I've just realized straight up she was right and I was wrong, that belonging has to come first. And number two, it's got me wondering, where did I find belonging? I think I was finding belonging. I think the truth was the reason I was ready to focus on purpose and action and was because I already had that need fulfilled in a way that I was taking entirely for granted and wasn't wasn't fully understanding or appreciating. And not always and not at every moment, but I think the reason I could push on her and say, ah, belonging, whatever, was out of was like out of a place of privilege, out of a place where I had encountered that in a way that I was just I did kind of luck into it, or I created a life around me that I was blessed to just have some belonging that was filling that need, at least momentarily. And so I wonder if those two things are at opposition. And I just really wonder where you landed on how do we find that belonging, or why is it important?
Yeah, I don't think that the things that we do to cultivate connection, to build community. I mean, so much of my past work has been in that space, also on college campuses,
Yeah.
um, with our church, creative communities, things like that. So a lot of my career has been doing the things or creating the systems or programs or to kind of have entry points into connection. But the way that I see belonging, it's kind of like the other side of the coin, of loneliness.
Hmm.
Belonging, like loneliness, is a sense that we carry within ourselves. It is very internal, and we can experience belonging whether we are in a crowded room with familiar faces or when we are alone. And like loneliness, we can
Hmm.
experience that alone or in a crowd of familiar
Yeah.
faces. Um, and so it is something internal that 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 we often think of belonging as something like a particular place or a particular people, and frame it in language of acceptance and language of fit or achievement, as if it is something out there to attain or for somebody else to hand it to us.
Mhm.
And it's not that it's completely detached from that, because I think it is an incredible gift when somebody offers us belonging in that way, that open-handedness and acceptance and safety. But we can't control those things.
Yeah.
We can't control the circles that are going to invite us in and open the door. But our belonging in the deeper sense does not have to be dependent on those things. That, for me, and so much of, it comes down a lot to my belief and my faith and my posture with God. And because so much of our belonging has to do with our identity.
Hmm.
Um, and so when I begin to really assess how I belong relates to both who I am, who I who God is, then that changes the way that I approach both belonging and other people. So, yeah, it's very internal. And I think a key turn in my own journey of understanding belonging is, I read Henry Nouwen's Return of the Prodigal Son.
Hmm.
And in his book, he talks about, both of the sons and the ways that we can often relate or identify with both the older and the younger son, and the ways that they related to the father. But ultimately, the invitation is not to identify with one son or the other, but to identify with the father, to be formed into the likeness of the father. Um, and so I can't remember the exact wording, but really, he introduced the question of what does it look like to become that place of welcome? What does it look like to become that home for someone else? And shifting that question for me from, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? To how can I become a place of welcome in the spaces I'm already in? That really shifted something internally for me that allowed me to settle into who I was to embrace the withness of God who goes with me, who embedded his welcome, his love into the fabric of who I am. And as I learn to live into the depths of those love, to then also become formed and an extension of that embrace in the world. And having that posture toward belonging changes the way that I enter a room. It changes my expectation that when I walk in, belonging isn't necessarily something that I expect to be given or hope to be given. I mean, granted, we're still going to hope. You know, we
Yeah.
want to be wanted.
Yeah.
We want those things, and that's not wrong. But I can remain settled in my belonging when I walk into a room and look for ways to welcome others and extend the thing that I want to be given. It just shifts things for me. It just
Wow.
has shifted everything um, in my approach and in my desire and longing for belonging.
That selflessness is a theology in itself. That idea that to find belonging, become belonging, become a belonging giver, a obnoxiously generous gifter of belonging. And it's not a quid pro quo that you're talking about. You're not saying if I give belonging, then I'll feel belonging. That's not what you're saying at all. There is a uh, I can't come up with a different phrase other than become belonging, become embody that love of God first, deeply, which is, by the way, not easy. I wouldn't think that's not like oh, okay, like just write that in my journal tonight and everything will be okay. No, that is a transformational idea, though. That's hard. That makes me want to be excited about it and then bang my head against the wall later on in the day when it's so hard to do. It's so hard to believe that about myself, to believe that I could be that or that I could give that to other people. But what a transformational idea, Sarah. I know there's a concept that you've written about called sort of being people of welcome. And I got really excited about that idea when I saw it, but I don't really know what you mean. I think I'm starting to get it based on what you just said. But I've got this vision for what between might be. Between for me, this whole project is I imagine millions of people around the world who, I'll borrow your term, who are people of welcome, who create churches in the space between them and every person they encounter. And that is the manifestation of not just between, I think that's the manifestation of Jesus's calling to us, the Great Commission. I think that's what we're sent in the world to do. But that requires like ownership. That requires me not going to the church. That requires me being the church, creating the church, erecting it around everyone I encounter. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this people of welcome concept, being people of welcome, because I just love that phrase.
Yeah. You know, I love the phrase too. And it's something that I kind of have to keep in front of me at all times because it's really easy for me to stray from that posture of welcome.
Yeah.
Um, I think that when I think of that phrase, people of welcome, it invites me to remember and to sit back down in the welcome I've already been given from
Mm.
God Himself. So I remember what it was like, you know, in my brain, my body, my lived experience of those moments when I sensed God's love and His kindness and His withness, um, in so many different ways, and no and that in combination with, you know, in I started paying a lot of attention to the people and the places where I felt welcome,
Mm.
felt safe, seen, respected, enjoyed. Um, and so paying attention to then what was it about those people and places that did make me feel like I could show up as the fullest imperfect version of myself. What was it? And in combination with, like you said, paying attention to, I read like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John kind of over and over again, just
Hmm.
trying to really pay attention to Jesus and how he interacted with other people. And so I think that there were a lot of commonalities in the values or the qualities of a person of welcome. And some of those things are, I think a person of welcome tends to be pretty self-aware. They're attentive to who they are and are honest about who they are with themselves and with others. There's a humility there. They recognize, humility being not necessarily, you know, self abatement, but just an honest assessment of the self who is still open to
Yeah.
being wrong and still open to the opinions of others
Yeah.
and the experiences of others. Um, I saw qualities of curiosity, people who ask good questions and are comfortable with questions.
Yeah.
Um, I also see a willingness to do the hard work
Yeah.
of loving and being with people amidst great difference, whether that's difference of opinion, perspective, skin color, belief system, all of those things, of a willingness to still see the person amidst those things. Um, Vulnerability, appropriate vulnerability,
Yeah.
self-aware vulnerability,
Yeah.
um, and just an open-handedness. And so, those aren't the only things, but those are certainly core to who a person of welcome is. And I think they coincide really, really well. When you talk about like the fruits of the spirit,
Yeah.
more and more, that's the kind of person who has a welcoming presence.
Yeah.
The love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all of those things. Um, and that's the way that Jesus interacted with people. And that's the kind of person that, as we spend time with God and do the hard work of of attending to the space within us that God already dwells,
Hmm.
and paying attention to that and asking him to expand and to expand us, that we then become, in who we are and the specificity of who we are, more like the Father as well. And I think it is important. I want to make sure I note, like, when I say a person of welcome, it's also not a welcome mat.
Hmm.
This doesn't mean that we become people who the world can just trot upon. It doesn't mean we don't have boundaries and limitations. Um, we are not the answer to everyone's loneliness. Um, we are not, and welcome doesn't become just another thing to achieve or attain, like a
Yeah.
badge of saying, "Look at me, I'm so welcoming."
Yeah.
Um, it, Belonging then becomes a way of being in the world, and we're gonna get off. It's gonna feel off kilter. We won't always necessarily sense that within ourselves, but it can be a place that we return to,
Yeah.
and we become settled in again and say, "Okay, let's sit down here and um, keep going in this." So
Yeah. There is the word gentleness came to mind as you were speaking, and I think I'm just cribbing that from something that you wrote someplace. But I sense that you want to encourage a gentler approach to the world, a gentler approach maybe even to ourselves. I can't help but feel that from you, Sarah. Like the way that you speak, your cadence, your there is a sweetness mixed with a strength in what you share. There is people can't see the video. Maybe I should start doing video podcasts, Sarah, but like I love the way when you are when you're sharing your deepest thoughts and just gold in this conversation, your eyes are closed, and that there's something about that. There's something so gentle and um, vulnerable about that that I can't help but comment on. I normally wouldn't comment on the way people show up on this, that other that our listeners can't see, but there is just something so gentle about that, about showing up in a way that is really humble, but I'm gonna give you the best that I've got right now. I'm gonna open this up. And that is what I think a person of welcome does in such a beautiful way. Anyway, I don't that's a weird comment for me to make, I guess, on a podcast,
No,
Sarah, but I
it
appreciate it.
no, I mean, it's not weird, and it's interesting to me that you point that out because for a long time I feel like I've had to apologize for my gentleness.
Mm,
I once had in some feedback on some writing that I was trying to submit for publication. Somebody once suggested maybe your writing is too gentle,
mm,
and so I have felt on numerous times like I have had to apologize or get over that,
sure.
or maybe I should maybe I should like have something really fiery to say.
Yeah.
Um, and and it's not to say I don't have fiery opinions on occasion, but like a lot, a lot of occasions. But um, I'm learning. I am learning not to apologize for gentleness.
Mm,
Um, because also I look at the world around me and my gosh, could we not use some more
right.
of that?
Yeah.
Um, I know I could, but
I think you're that point. Gentleness is the radical hot take that our world needs today. I mean, it really is. And I find myself drawn to gentleness, but uh, addicted to the feeling I get when other people respond to me being snarky and loud and sharp, right?
mm,
I really believe that is I've talked about this before, but I believe that is this addiction that we have. It is this poison drug that is really easy to get addicted to. The sharper, nastier, snarkier you can be, the more uh, dopamine hits you get from the world around you because they give it to you. And gentle doesn't do that, but that is a radical choice to make, I think,
mm,
and one that can be really beautiful and that so many people around us need.
yeah. Well, and I think we need both because I also have friends who maybe not the like sharpness, but
Yeah,
I have friends who have very strong voices and are speaking into areas where we need really
yeah,
strong and um, fiery voices.
yeah,
And I think we need them both because I don't know what I would do without some of those other voices as well. I just have had to come to a place of knowing who I am to know it's not me.
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Hey, so we've got this thing in common, vaguely in common in our past careers, in that we both worked with college students for a significant portion of our career. I did for a very, very long time, but I wasn't on a college campus. I did work on a college campus for a while, but that doesn't really count. I spent a large part of my life traveling to and getting to be somebody who pops into a college campus, loves on college students for a little while, speaks to them, does some workshops, and leaves. And you worked with college students too. And I think to me, one of the reasons I was so attracted to the life of college students for a long time was because it is such a concentrated window of development of adulthood and childhood mashed up in such a way that if you look at it for a few minutes, it is so raw and so real and so beautifully human. God is all over the place. It is messy and tragic and perfect. It is college students are wonderful. And it's also a place where if you're looking to see a human experiment in belonging, in the search for belonging, in the struggle for belonging, look no further than your local college campus and you will see it on full display. And I wonder lessons that maybe you took out of that time working with
Mm.
college students that might have informed this book and might inform the way that you see the world now.
Yeah, my role on I worked in primarily residence life. So my husband and I, and we only had one or two boys at the time. Um, but we all lived on campus, and we lived in a building with college students
Yeah.
that, my kids grew up in that they would walk out our front door into a sea of college students, and it
Hmm.
just was normal. And so we really had a front row seat to the formation that was happening in that season. I mean, and literally could walk out our door and bear witness to conversations about relationships, or um, to see students and to sit with students in crisis moments, whether that was death, whether that was drug overdose,
Hmm.
whether that was um, a first instance where they, like bipolar disorder
Hmm.
um, made its presence known in a person's life, and having to sit with them and take people to the hospital
Yeah.
and things like that. And so got to honestly, a lot of it was just being there and walking alongside people. But I think that what's so interesting about that age is that there is so much happening developmentally as as young adults learn to establish themselves and their identity apart from their family of origins. There's a fancy term for it called differentiation. And
Hmm.
to some degree, we kind of are always going through this differentiation from the moment that we leave our mother's wombs, of being able to separate, oh, hey, we're actually two different human people.
Hmm.
but but it kind of goes into this uh it's like really pressure packed, and that's like 18 to 25 years old people.
Yeah.
um it's a really pivotal season of that differentiation, of learning to establish who they are apart from their parents, apart from their families of origin, apart from the places, even even if it's similar or close to where they grew up, um while also with healthy differentiation, you're learning to still remain connected, you know of maybe not completely cutting ties, and but so trying to navigate that. And it is a very difficult process, not only for those students who are trying to say, okay, now who am I, but it is also a very difficult process for those parents who are suddenly saying,
Yeah.
oh, you don't do you not need me anymore,
Right.
or like it's a renegotiation of the relationships. Um and when I think of, we talked about our grade school selves. I think some of us are still asking the questions of our young adult, college age selves as well. But it's really just the first time we really had to be confronted with those big questions of who am I? And
Yeah.
sometimes those things get wrapped up in career. Sometimes those get wrapped up in like social circles.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that there is a crisis of what am I going to identify with now?
Yeah. That, and so many people, I think you're right, that so many people, whether they have a college experience or not, in those traditional college age years, they, that differentiation happens to an extent. And for some folks, they get stunted in that trying to find their own identity. And then they end up finding that identity in some group or something that isn't really healthy, and they get stuck there. And I think there's a whole lot of people who got stuck in those spaces
Mm.
because they're so desperate for both identity differentiation, individualization, feeling independent, and belonging at the same time, and finding identity within those groups, which sometimes can be really healthy and really cool and really empowering. And other times, boy, I think college age students are so vulnerable because of that need to find identity that there's a whole lot of easy things that can suck them in and trap them for a large period of their life. And now we see, I think a whole lot of people coming out of high control faith communities or other just sort of damaging things that they'd been in for a long time, finding people on the internet, on social media that are like, hey, I had this experience too, and it wasn't healthy for me either. And so there's this new identity of, I'm going to use the word deconstruction. I actually don't mean it just in the faith sense. I mean, there's sort of this decoupling of the things that we used as shortcuts to find that differentiation early on, and recalibrating ourselves maybe for a new chapter in our life. And anyway, I just seem to have that conversation with so many people right now. And I don't know if that's just because of the phase of life I'm in, or if that's the phase of life, or if that's happening more and more than it ever has. But it's fascinating to still care very much for me about college students and working with college students. I love working with college students, and watching, sort of this later in adulthood experience of people trying to detach themselves from some of those unhealthy connections they made coming out of that time in their life.
Yeah. And some of that, I think that that's just our ongoing, that's why belonging is like, it's not a place of arrival. Like
Mm.
it continues. It's something that we continue to, there are things that we shed, that we put down. There are seasons where, um, one place fits and it fits really good for a season. Sweater, it became tight or it
Mhm.
shrunk, or,
Yeah.
and we say, oh, I got to donate it to Goodwill.
Yeah.
So, um, there is still, and that's the hard thing about belonging, is that it's not a place of arrival. It continues to shift and bend and flux as we do, because we are people who continue to become. We are
Yeah.
people who continue to grow and identify, um, who we are and who God is. And I love, I think it was Richard Rohr who wrote about, it's not that God is unknowable, that but infinitely knowable.
Mm.
And so in that, there's a constant, sense of learning to be like the Father is ongoing, because God is always deeper and wider and more abundant. And so that's going to take an eternity,
Yeah. Yeah.
to continue to become these people of welcome, and
Yeah.
to live from the welcome already within us.
Yeah. We mentioned your podcast a couple times earlier. Again, for any listener out there who wants to jump over to Sarah's podcast, it's called Human Together, and it's just full of wonderful, gentle conversations like this. But Sarah, it's about living a communal life. I think you say it's a podcast for people who agree it's not good to be alone, but who secretly wonder whether it might be easier. And I like that tagline. What do you want to accomplish with that show? Human Together. What's the message you're trying to share through those conversations and interviews and inspirational anecdotes that I know you're dropping throughout that show?
Yeah, I don't think I have like a core message or mission, but I just came to the realization that I had been doing so much research and writing about belonging, on my own. I had, the Substack Human Together, for a while, but my voice was the only voice
Hmm.
that was speaking into those spaces. And I just realized, I need, if I'm going to write about being human together, I need to
Yeah.
have some other humans
Yeah.
in this process. And so really it's just creating a space for us to talk about the things that are shared between us. You know, the
Yeah.
communal life is that those spaces of overlap between us. And so then what does it look like to live more communally
Mm.
and having those, it means a really broad umbrella,
Yeah.
but just inviting other people to sit beneath that
Yeah.
and engage in those conversations and to and for so for then for listeners to hear voices other than my own.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. I had somebody ask me yesterday, literally yesterday, like, what's the point of the podcast that you're doing? And I said, well, there's two things. Of course, this is what I do sometimes. I answer questions by saying there are two or three things, and I only know the first one, and I'm hoping that the rest of my sentence will fill in
They'll
whatever the
come
other
to
one is,
you.
right? But the first one, I did know the first one. For me, the number one reason I want to do this podcast is to give people permission, because I don't think we have enough people giving us permission in our faith lives and our spiritual lives, permission to be curious about the way other people see the world. I think, and that's one thing I wanted to do with this. The other thing that I came up with as I was building my answer to the question was was kind of your point. Like, uh, I I was talking about, the space between us is sacred, and I've been doing that for a long time, and I love it, and I'm going to keep doing it, and my voice will continue to keep sharing that in lots of different ways. But I wanted to just bring people inside the conversations I'm having that are A, sacred, but also B, are about it, but sort of vaguely about what I'm talking about, or they intersect with it, or there's a Venn diagram where the stuff that you're doing and the stuff that I'm doing is pretty close enough that, man, it's kind of cool. And it's okay if it's not exactly on target, because we're going to learn some cool things from each other. And that's the point. That's what's sacred. That's where God is, right there in that stuff that overlaps in the Venn diagram. There's just incredible creation energy in that, but you got to have the conversation to figure out what it is, right? And so, yeah, anyway, I very much relate to your answer of like, I don't know, but I know it's right. I know this is the right thing to do.
Right.
Sarah, this has been fantastic. I am just so grateful for this. Congratulations on the book. The
Thank
Way
you.
of Belonging. What's the subtitle of the book? I've got it written someplace.
Yeah, it's the way of belonging, reimagining who we are and how we relate.
Reimagining who we are and how we relate. Uh, a message that is that. Thanks for sharing so much about what this book is about. But for me, that idea of that transformational message of becoming belonging and allowing uh, belonging to envelop your heart so that you might be able to selflessly give it away, and in that process finding your own belonging, that is just so beautiful and so powerful. I'm excited to read the book. I haven't yet, and I'm excited to, but it'll be out. This episode should be coming out about the exact same time that your book comes out. And so,
Nice.
listeners, find it wherever go to your library, ask for it, go to the bookstore, go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, go to your local bookseller, especially find The Way of Belonging by Sarah Westfall. Sarah, thanks so much for this.
Yeah, it's been good, Matt. I love spaces like this where we can just get into it.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between Podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. My favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.